Hunter Biden is under federal investigation for his China dealings. The FBI goes after China's fox hunters in the US. And a Chinese spy gets up close and very personal with US politicians. Then more on this week's China News headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell, and these are this week's China News headlines. We've learned that U.S. federal prosecutors have opened a criminal investigation into Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, which focuses on his business dealings in China. Investigators have been examining multiple financial issues, including whether Hunter Biden and his associates violated tax and money laundering laws in business dealings in foreign countries, principally China. And apparently, the investigation began as early as 2018. Now, this might not be a huge surprise to some of you, if you remember how, just a couple months before the presidential election, the Republican-led Senate Finance and Homeland Security Committees published this report about Hunter Biden and his shady dealings in China and Ukraine. The September report said there exists a vast web of corporate connections and financial transactions between and among the Biden family and Chinese nationals. But the report was barely mentioned in most mainstream media at the time. And then, when even more explosive stories came out about Hunter Biden's business deals, including the laptop story from the New York Post, non-conservative media didn't even cover those, or they claimed they were a far-right smear campaign. According to Project Veritas, CNN actively suppressed the story.
The Hunter Biden story was an explosive blow against Joe Biden leading up to the presidential election. But listen on this 9 a.m. editorial conference call at CNN how President Jeff Zucker chooses to not cover this important story.
So why is CNN reporting on the federal investigation into Hunter Biden now? Well, activity in the investigation had gone covert in recent months due to Justice Department guidelines prohibiting overt actions that could affect an election. Okay, I can understand the Justice Department's argument, and I'm sure CNN also wouldn't want potentially shady China connections to affect the election. Unless, of course, those shady China connections might involve Trump. Of course, if Joe Biden becomes president, I somehow don't think he'll want federal prosecutors to continue the investigation into his son. And in the event of any more Hunter Biden sex tapes being released, don't worry. I'll be sure to have Matt watch them for us, after he's done recovering from the last one. Not all heroes wear capes. But now for some good news. Europe might be finally standing up to the Chinese Communist Party. That's a big deal. Germany has been quite soft on China in the past. There's a lot of German corporate interests in China. I talked about that on a recent episode, Germany's China problem. But this week, the EU adopted landmark legislation called the EU Global Human Rights Sanctions Regime. It's kind of a clunky name, but it's important. It's basically their Global Magnitsky Act. Okay, that's also a clunky name. Anyways, here's what it does. According to a press release, the EU is equipping itself with a framework that will allow it to target individuals, entities, and bodies, including state and non-state actors, responsible for, involved in, or associated with serious human rights violations and abuses worldwide, no matter where they occurred. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo congratulated the EU on the legislation. Meanwhile, lawmakers in France are working on new legislation aimed at forced organ harvesting in China.
French daily newspaper Le Monde, The World, recently reported that over 60 French MPs questioned the origin of organs used in transplant operations in China and proposed a bill in September aimed at more transparency and scientific cooperation between French and Chinese medical institutes. When the French Minister of Health said there was no need for new legislation, Frédéric Dumas-Zajdela, member of the French National Assembly, responded, "The precautionary principle must apply if French institutions do not have the means to verify what Chinese hospitals are doing. Otherwise, what are ethical principles for?"
Of course, the EU can create a legal framework that allows governments to address human rights abuses in China. But the question will be whether they actually use those tools. Hopefully, they'll use their legal tools the same way the U.S. has been going after the Chinese communist regime. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.